Welcome back to another episode of the Legal Lowdown. I am your host, Matthew R. Carpenter, an attorney, and today we are cracking open the latest SEC enforcement actions leading into the week of July 21st, 2025. My mission is to give you the inside scoop on some pretty serious financial hijinks. We're also looking at where things went off the rails and maybe what we can learn from it all this week. Well, it seems like the big themes are these pretty bold offering frauds and also a number of insider trading cases. We just keep seeing that mix week after week after week, right? The SEC filed several new civil actions just last week. So let's start with some of the offerings fraud cases, where the promises to investors seem about as real as, well, the Epstein list. Yeah, I said it. Yeah, I did. First, we got SEC versus Hunsaker, which is a case out of the Southern District of New York. In that matter, defendant Hunsaker acted as the CEO of a company called Quinnybee. And for a period of 5 years, starting in 2019, she basically just lied. Lied big time. So you know how companies release financials to investors to tell investors about the company? Well, apparently starting in 2019, defendant Hunsaker took financial statements prepared by her company and just straight up falsified them. She then used the false financials to persuade people to invest in her company. And after that, things just got worse. As the financials began to falsely report how much capital the company had and how much stock it had issued, what could go wrong, right? Defendant Hunsaker was caught in 2024 after she invited investors to her office to review the financials. During the meeting, the investors noticed something was off when they discovered key pages missing from the financial statements. The SEC got involved and charged defendant Hunsaker with violations of Section 10B and Section 17A. Okay, so our next offerings fraud case is SEC versus Fernandez. We actually talked about this in our last episode. This is the defendant that collected money for short-term, foolproof investments. She raised about $360,000, but then just spent it on herself. Yeah, I forgot to mention that she was sentenced to 33 months in prison. Right, in case you didn't know. So real prison time for defendant Hernandez in this offerings fraud case. Okay, that wraps up offerings fraud for the week leading into July 21st. The only other types of cases that saw action during that time were insider trading cases, of which we have two. First up, we have SEC versus Watson from the Southern District of New York. And that one, defendant Watson, he was a controlling shareholder of a company called Long Island Iced Tea Corp. Sounds fun. Defendant Watson allegedly tipped off a business associate about a big upcoming business pivot, standard insider trading stuff. But the real issue here is not really about SEC enforcement of insider trading. It's more about courtroom procedure. You see, defendant Watson is a foreign national, and the SEC has been trying to serve him a complaint since 2019. But they've been just struggling. Even after using the Hague Convention, which if you don't know, is notoriously inefficient for serving legal complaints on foreign nationals. It takes forever. So it's understandable that the Hague Convention complaint didn't make its way through. It was so bad, as a matter of fact, the SEC was actually able to serve defendant Watson by publishing the complaint in the news. So again, if you don't know, if a company or a plaintiff is trying to serve you a complaint, and they're legitimately serving where you live, your place of business, what have you, but they're not getting a response, they can actually, in rare circumstances, just put that complaint in the newspaper, put notice of the lawsuit in the newspaper, right? And that will constitute service on you, and you'll be required to appear or you'll suffer consequences. And that's exactly what happened in this SEC versus Watson case. Because defendant Watson failed to appear even after service was published publicly, the court entered what is known as a default judgment against him, which, again, for those of you who don't know, we're full of lessons today, basically means the SEC is going to get everything it wants if you don't show up to court. But not surprisingly, after the default judgment was entered, defendant Watson did kind of pop up out of nowhere in early July of this year, and now his case is set to proceed. Really highlights the global reach of these regulations, though, I think, as well, right? You can run, but you maybe can't hide. This guy was living in Ibiza, Spain, which sounds great, but it shows you how relentless the SEC is. Definitely a cat and mouse game across borders. Okay, our last case, because I'm going to try to make this episode short for you guys. I know it's summertime. It's a bit more straightforward, but still significant. It's called SEC versus Gomez from the Western District of Texas. And a side note, what we seem to be learning, guys, in all these securities recaps is that most of these securities cases are going to be enforced in New York, California, and Texas. I mean, we've seen, West Virginia sprinkled in there, Pennsylvania sprinkled in there, a lot of the, some of the Midwest big dogs, but mainly New York, Cali, and Texas. So if you want to do securities work, those are probably good places to be. Defendant Gomez in this SEC enforcement action is a Mexican native who was operating out of Texas, and she decided to target primarily Hispanic investors. Man, it really be your own people. Oh my God. Then as a whole, Defendant Gomez was able to raise $9 million by telling the investors that she was placing the money in an investment advisor account that was insured up to 75%. So basically, the investors were guaranteed to never take losses more than 25% because their investments were insured up to 75%. Gomez also told investors that she would generate double-digit interest on the investments that they made and that interest would be paid back each month. So your money is secured and you're going to be getting double-digit interest each month. That's probably how she was able to get that $9 million, because that sounds like a sweet deal, but unfortunately in these cases, sweet deals are often too good to be true. So, the truth is that $9 million Gomez raised was never used for the purposes that were communicated to investors. Instead, Defendant Gomez loaned nearly, I'm sorry, I've been saying she, it's a he. Defendant Gomez loaned nearly $700,000 to his father-in-law, and he used the remainder for unrelated business ventures. When he started running low on assets, Defendant Gomez panicked and told investors that his companies ran into an unexpected liquidation incident that prevented him from paying back their investment. So that 75% insurance out the window. Feeling the heat, Defendant Gomez also told investors that his companies were putting together a bailout loan to cover their losses. But all that was a lie. The SEC got involved and has brought Section 10B claims as well as Section 206 investment advisor claims. What's really concerning in the Gomez case, and we see this often, is how these schemes target specific communities preying on trust. In that case, in the Gomez case that is, the Hispanic community, it just absolutely screams for caution. You have to verify anything that sounds too good to be true, guys, even if it's your own people. And just a quick note before we wrap up, the SEC also dismissed 2 cases they previously filed. SEC versus Coburn and SEC versus Pinnacle Advisors, LLC, both dismissed without explanation. So a little bit of mystery remains there, but the SEC has been doing that all year. So many dismissals with literally no explanation. I'm curious as to whether or not this is I'm just curious as to why that's happening. If you guys have any thoughts on that, please leave them in the comments. So let's briefly summarize this week's legal lowdown. We saw fake financials good enough for a movie script, international chases, and promises that were just, smoke and mirrors. So truly, securities enforcement is never boring, and what stands out, I think, is the human element in all of this. It's about the abuse of trust, people literally making up realities, and then the regulators pushing back hard. Right? These aren't just dry cases. These are stories about vigilance in the financial markets, constant vigilance. So what's the takeaway for you listening? Well, it's a powerful reminder, even with complex schemes, the biggest red flags are often very simple. Like that missing page or a no-risk guarantee, right? That sounds way too good to be true, so trust your gut. And maybe another piece to get your beak wet on, consider this. If people go to such incredible lengths to create these financial illusions, how can we stay informed to get a better understanding of how to attune our own radar? How do we spot the real deal early on so people don't lose life savings? The smoke and mirrors never end. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Legal Lowdown.